So we are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is 12:01. The deliberation has taken far longer than we anticipated when the match started, but about as much time as we expected by the time the match had ended. I say that to say this was an excellent, excellent debate. And so the scores ending on this round, 285 points to one school, that is the school who will not be advancing, to another school's 289 points. So these are, if you're watching the leaderboard, incredible scores. A losing score of 285 is a comically large score to not win on. Nevertheless, the team that gets this will move on to the third place playoff. The team that gets a 289 will move on to the championship finals. Both will be held on the same day. So then what did we get from this debate? The motion says this house believes that normalizing mental health leave will meaningfully improve workplace culture. The debate started off with Josh Null telling us in no ex in very explicit terms, yes, exactly what this motion is asking us about. See, Josh Null tells us that the burden of this motion is not to find perfection. The burden of this motion is not to find the best way of increasing workplace culture. The burden of this debate is simply to define or to convince the panel why mental health leave will meaningfully improve it. We think that's a really interesting meta-analysis way of really setting up the debate. And we think Justin is 100% right. We think that the motion doesn't demand from Wolmer to find the best way or the only way. It just requires to identify, is this a meaningful way to significantly increase the culture, improve the culture? To that end, what does he tell us? Well, he tells us that in as much as we have an existing system in status quo that is sick leave, we're simply going to append onto that 2 weeks of mental leave. And that's going to do something really interesting. It entrenches in law the mental health leave. And he says that this is particularly important because it no longer becomes a matter of discretion. Inasmuch as this is now appended to what he contends is status quo sick leave, you are entitled to your mental health leave. It removes from the employers any sort of discretion as to whether or not they're going to give it to you. And that gives us a few benefits. It tells us that it gives us a good return on your investment because when you go off on your mental health leave, you come back refreshed, you come back better, you come back 40% better, he claims, right? And your productivity increases. He says burnout is contagious, but so is a recharged employee. And in as much as that employee comes back and is feeling much better, that is going to reciprocate throughout the entire workforce. The other ideas that came out from it is that you humanize the workplace in as much as you're overwhelmed, you cannot emphasize. And then this general idea that was pervasive in the side of the Wilmer's case, that an interesting side effect of having a mental health leave is you actually get structural change. They tell us that it undermines nepotism, it includes psycho safety. Vulnerability is something that is going to be more accepted in the workplace in as much as this has become an institutionalized thing in the workplace. That's how Wolmer's opened this debate. Take One tells us that is the first speaker from opposition that, well, no. Because what's functionally going to happen is that you're going to remove these individuals from your workplace. They're going to come back. You're going to be really refreshed. They're going to come back to the same structural issues that existed in status quo, and it's going to lead them back to square one. So herein lies the first clash of the debate. Whether you come back stressed or better, whether you come back better from reducing all of that stress and then you propagate that throughout the workplace, you come back refreshed, or as Cornwall contends, you come back to the same outcome, the same overburden, the same burnout, and you're not sure which one, and it ends up being in a situation where you end up just feeling burdened nevertheless. Wow, that was an interesting clash. And in fact, the judges were actually split on the outcome of that clash. Some of the judges were convinced that the propagation that you come back with feeling renewed and refreshed is going to make the workplace objectively a better place, in as much as you get that propagation and that revolving door. Other members of the panel think that what's more likely going to happen is that you're going to come back into the same situations, into the same circumstances. You're not going to be happy. You're not going to get any meaningful change. right? If the panel were to make a vote on that decision, I, as chair, would like to make the meaningful decision that we think that proposition wins on that clash ever so slightly. We think that the statistics and the analysis and the science that came behind why it is likely that you're going to be coming back from that vacation, that mental leave, particularly refreshed, is compelling. Then we got into the second question, data. Is the signal enough to indicate to these individuals that there is a problem? See, Wilmer tells us coming out in their second and third speech, particularly coming out from Jordan, Wilmer tells us that what happens is that you don't have any documentation. But in as much as mental health leave is now a documented part of the HR system, individuals are able to recognize and appreciate when there is an imbalance or a cluster of people taking their mental leave in one area. That's a data driven, documented driven indication that something is wrong, and that is harder to ignore than just the arbitrariness that exists in status quo with the lack of data. Cornwall tells us, coming out particularly from their second speech and really some hammering it home in their third speech from Andrew Commock, that what actually is happening is that we already know that people are stressed out. We already know that people are burnt out. We already know that people are suffering from bad mental health outcomes. We don't need another signal. It's not going to do anything. It's going to lead to the same problems. Right? On the question of structural issues, Cornwall contends that you will not have any meaningful improvement in workplace culture because there are structural issues that exist in the workplace culture that mental health leave will not solve. Overburdened workplaces, bad work environments, really toxic managers. These are structural issues that will not be solved for, Cornwall contends, and demanded that Wilmer's policy does not solve for that. We don't agree. We think Wolmer's policy does solve for that in some great extent. We think that in as much as Wolmer explains that the mental health leave is going to have some really awesome side effects, and those side effects can undermine the structural issues, then we do get some sort of solvency for that. They tell us in as much as mental health leave is now existing in status quo, it is something that is mandatory, not discretionary, then individuals are not going to want that big paper trail to say, listen, all of my department is taking a mental health leave. That's going to incentivize me to fix the workload issue, incentivize me to fix burnout, incentivize me to do all of these wonderful and interesting things. We think that is acceptable in the debate. We buy it to some extent. We buy it to the extent that the motion doesn't ask you to solve for everything. We buy it to the extent that it just asks if it is a meaningful increase, and so we buy that contention. All of that, however, ladies and gentlemen, is dependent on whether or not you take the leave. If you don't take the leave, then all the benefits that you are going to get as a result of mental health leave are going to be significantly undermined. Cornwall College tells us that there is going to be an existing stigma to individuals who take a mental health leave. They say that stigma exists already in status quo with sick leave. Wilmer's contends that that is a stigma that is going to be overcome because, quite frankly, we saw the same thing happen with maternity leave, and then individuals come and they get their maternity leave, it becomes entrenched in law, and it wasn't such a big deal. We thought that was interesting. We weighed that idea against Cornwall's case. Cornwall tells us that what's actually going to happen is that when you take a mental health leave, you're saying, I am unfit for my job, I am overburdened, I am stressed out, I am incapable of managing the pressures that exist, I am mentally unstable, and I am going to be passed upon promotions. The disincentive and stigma exists nonetheless. Cornwall College tells us, particularly coming out from Tequan, and of course from Andrew, that what is going to happen is that functionally people are not going to want to take the leave. We see this happening in status quo, even in the situations with maternity, right? Are one of the real reasons why individuals are less likely to hire women and pay them less. We see this existing in status quo. We see the stigma that exists in status quo as it relates to mental health. And the judges were convinced at the end of the day that yes, it is going to be a barrier as to whether or not you're going to actually want to take the leave because of the lack of promotion, the stigma, and the kind of things that are going to be levied upon you. We think that is a big argument and one that needed to be contended with, dismantled, or at least significantly undermined in the debate. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, the team that wins this match and will automatically advance to the grand finals of this competition in person, live at JCSA Park, is the team in opposition Cornwall College. Congratulations, Cornwall College. Well played. Well played, Wolmer's Boys School.
Uh, Good day. Thank you again for the adjudication. Thank you, Wilmers, for our well-fought debate. Trust me, it was a lot of preparation, and the cases were excellent on both sides, I would say. So thank you again, everyone that was here. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tekwan, and we really believe that your case was solid as well. And we thank you for such an enthralling. We appreciate
Ladies and gentlemen, we have in our presence three best debaters, three speakers tied on 80 points. From Cornwall College, we have Tekwan Ellis, the first speaker, and Andrew Kamat, the third speaker, scoring a massive 80 points. From Wolmer's Boys School, their first speaker, Josh Nell Powell, also securing 80 points. A three-way split for best debater. The judges couldn't break the tie amongst the three. And so, ladies and gentlemen, with that said, thank you so much for tuning in. This was the first semi-final match of this competition. If this match was anything to go by, you absolutely want to be tuned in for the next competition. That will see two other teams, Immaculate Conception High School, face off against Knox College. We'll see you in a bit for that match.
Guys, who won? I didn't have the heart to actually listen.
It was Knox. I'm sorry. You must say Knox Cornwall. Look at me reading. Listen, I'm coming off this